We'll wait a couple of minutes in case there's anybody running late. Just before we get started, I'll introduce myself to anybody who's not had a course with me before. But everybody's in the correct class, right? CGS4828? Okay. And everybody's at a working computer? Okay, perfect. Okay, we'll wait 2 more minutes just in case anybody's running late for their first day class, and we'll go through introductions and all that. And then my goal is to spend as little as possible on the intro stuff, because I think for the most part everyone here is seniors, and then we'll get right into the coursework, writing some code, doing the interesting stuff. Okay, so we're still streaming here. Everything looks good. No dropped frames. Just go ahead and make sure we're... I guess that's fine. And while we're waiting, everyone does have a mask, correct? Thumbs up if you have a mask, thumbs down if you don't. Okay, because I have extras, and just so you know, regardless of what county you're in, if that county has a mask order or not, IRSC's blanket policy is masks for campus. You probably already saw the signs, but I think for the most part, everyone in here is seniors, and seniors tend to be pretty on it, so I'm not going to make too much of a speech on that. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. I know some of you are still setting up. So main thing is everyone's at a working computer. And you are also welcome to bring your own computer as well. And due to coronavirus and everything that's going on, I would actually, for most people, suggest it. Okay, so let's go ahead and go through here. So we are the 9 o'clock class. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. So my name is Dr. Bakley. How many people have had a class with me before? A couple people? Okay. So for those that haven't, well, my name is Dr. Bakley. That's how you pronounce it. And I won't get offended if about halfway through the semester you can't pronounce it anymore. It's fine. You can just say professor. I won't be offended. The best way to get a hold of me is going to be by email. So phone is like hit or miss. I teach even during the pandemic. I'm teaching a lot of live classes. I get pulled into a lot of meetings. I might be, even if I'm at my desk in my office, I might be helping somebody. So by far the best way is through email. And then if you email me, make sure it's through your Rivermail account. And I'm not going to make too much of a speech on this because, again, you're seniors, but just so you know, the official school policy, and I imagine it's probably a nationwide policy for pretty much every college or university, is that we're really not supposed to communicate with you if it's via a personal email address. And it should be obvious that somebody else could just say, hey, I'm this student. And so because you have to actually log into your IRC Rivermail account, there's some level of security. It may not be perfect, but so that's the reasoning, is because your grades are private, they're yours, and I'm sure you wouldn't appreciate it if, say, for example, let's think of a common scenario, maybe your parents want to know your grades, and your adults, they have to actually sign a form to get and you have to sign it too to be able to get your grades. You have to release your grades to people or tell them yourselves. And so what they could do is sign up for a Gmail account, put your name there, and then, keep all communications to Rivermail. Now, sometimes I'll let it slip as far as if you're just like, hey, it looks like there's a mistake on assignment number 4, or can you clarify this sentence? If it's not discussing personal grades or something like that, usually I'll let it slide. But if it's anything even remotely personal as far as your grades or a special circumstance or requesting extensions, that sort of stuff, make sure it's in your Rivermail. Okay. So, so the best way to get a hold of me is email. Office hours are inside Blackboard here. Okay, so I pretty much put them all on Monday. The reason being is they're all the way till 7 at night because I know some people work, and so I try to put them a little bit later. And it's kind of tough to otherwise put them in for 1 hour at a time. So I had all of Monday free. So, but I'm usually on campus anyway. So if you email me ahead of time, there's a good chance if, say, you need to get a hold of me Thursday or Friday, there's a good chance that I'll be on campus. So you just need to work at a time. One thing that is different with office hours this semester is that I don't know if this is across the board for the school. It is, at least for computer science department and digital media as well, is that you have to make an appointment because they're, for obvious reasons with the pandemic and everything going on, is that they're really trying to do social distancing and limit the number of people in a room. And so just send me an email. But for the most part, to be honest, 95%, that's just a made-up number of things that people need help with can be taken care of over email. So it's rare that something actually gets to the point that I need to talk to the person and be face-to-face with them. It's usually there's a pretty good chance we can just work it out over via email. Okay, so that's it for office hours and that sort of stuff. Obviously, we're in the middle of a pandemic. Things are very different. Halfway through the spring semester, we had to just all of a sudden flip over from live to online. I'm sure that was very difficult on everybody. And I think thinking back, the last 2 fall semesters, I think we've had hurricanes as well. So whether or not I can't, I'm very bad at, we have so many hurricanes, and I've been living in Florida so long I lose track of them. But I'm pretty sure, last 2 fall. So keep up with your work. These lectures are recorded, so for anybody who walked in late, just to let you know, I am recording this, and you'll see me bring this up every once in a while. I've had a couple times where the stream dropped off for whatever reason, so you will see me every 10 minutes or so just open this up just to make sure it's still streaming. You can see from the announcement I made that you can go and read the whole thing, but basically some of you might not be comfortable being on campus, and I think there's like 10 or 11 people enrolled in the course officially, and I see like about 5 in here, so I'm sure some people are already taking advantage of this. You're welcome to stay home if you don't feel comfortable being on campus, but I am going to put some rules into place for that. Is that to be able to watch the lectures from home, you need obviously a working computer and working internet access. That's the first thing that should be obvious. But the reason I'm saying that is because I don't want to hear, you're signed up for the class, a live class. I don't want to hear excuses that, I don't have a working computer at home. It's like, it's unfortunate. Maybe try to get a laptop, but in the meantime, you still got a course to get through. You've got a bunch of working computers in this room, so that's a requirement. Is you need a working computer and working. I should say reliable is a better term. It needs to work most of the time, and another one that maybe will throw some people off is that you need access to 2 screens. This will work, and anybody who's had a class with me before knows is that I give lots of code examples up here on the projector. I'll talk a little bit about those examples, and then you'll write the code. There's something about taking the examples, and rather than just looking at them, there's something about actually writing them. I don't know what it is. There's something with the human brain that little act of actually typing out that code helps you with your understanding and helps you memorize it. So what you need to be able to do is simulate that at home. Or replicate that, I guess is a better term. Replicate that at home to where you can be watching the lecture and then also typing out code. Now the 2 most obvious ways to accomplish this are, one, a lot of people have dual monitors, especially people who do gaming. Just show of hands, how many people in here have two computer monitors, dual monitors? Anybody? Okay. One thing I have noticed is with more and more people with laptops, that's becoming a little bit less common. They just use the screen on their laptop. But what a lot of people do have is a TV, and because I very purposefully record these through YouTube, what that means is that these smart TVs that they have now, they'll either be built in, or if you have a Chromecast or Amazon's Fire, I'm pretty sure I don't have an Apple TV, but I'm pretty sure it probably has some sort of YouTube app. And then all you have to do is type my name in there, and then the playlists will come up for the course, okay? And then from there, what you can do is on your TV, watch the lecture, pause it when you need to, and so forth, and then type the code on your laptop or computer or whatever, okay? So is everybody very clear about that? The reason I'm making such a big deal about this is because it's very difficult if you just say all you have is your laptop to watch the lecture for, say, 5 minutes, and then try to minimize the lecture, memorize the code, type it into the editor. Oh, I made a bunch of mistakes. Open it up again. That process of flipping back and forth. Or maybe you could tile the windows side by side, but at that point the fonts are going to be so small it's going to be very difficult. Okay. And some other hopefully obvious stuff is keep up with these lectures week to week. I will. So they actually post right away, and they're actually live streamed. What I usually do is rename them and put them into a playlist. That might take me, I might get to that sometime at the end of the day today because I've got other classes. But you can get to the lectures right away. And that's one of the reasons I do this little thing at the beginning, is just if you see a couple of lectures that are unnamed, just click through them and say, oh, okay, that one's CGS4828 for today's date, and you can go ahead and watch that. So they're available immediately, but at the end of the day, each lecture day, I'll organize them into a playlist. Another one, you have to feel somewhat comfortable with the course material. Again, this should seem obvious, but I just don't want anybody who's like completely lost trying to do this at home, because usually I can answer questions very, very quickly in class. But if you're doing this from home and you run into a problem, some of these problems can stretch on for days when we could answer it in 5 minutes in class. And that's pretty much it. Okay. Now, if you are going to show up to class, be aware that the pandemic is probably going to be a constant issue. It's tough because it's unknown. It may fizzle out and turn into nothing and make it way worse. We just don't know. And we sort of have to plan and assume that things may get worse. So there may be instances where somebody shows up to class with it, and you're told to self-quarantine, and all of a sudden everyone in this room is you had planned on showing up to class during the semester, and all of a sudden you're not allowed to show up to class anymore because you have to self-quarantine for so many days. So just keep that in mind. Also keep in mind, if you have some sort of coronavirus-like symptoms, just please stay home and watch the lectures. The reason being is because if it turns out that you do have it, even if you didn't give it to anybody else, they're being obviously very cautious, and so it may end up with a situation where a bunch of people have to quarantine, and so just everyone in here is adults, everyone in here is seniors, I think. Just be responsible, keep others in mind. There's a lot of misinformation going out there. There's a lot of where we don't know the answer yet, and people are speaking authoritatively like they know the answer. The best advice I would give you between just coronavirus and your classes is just watch out for yourself, try to be respectful of others, and I guess that's just how you can live your life in general. But okay, any questions on that? Anything coronavirus related? Everyone's good? Okay. So let's talk about the actual course. This is an extension of a couple other classes. So CGS1821, where you learn the very basics of HTML and CSS, a little bit of WordPress. Then there's another course. Professor Gibson used to teach it. I think Professor Calvert mostly handles it now. It's GRA something. It's scripting for websites. Does anybody remember the course number or the title? How many people have taken that course? Show of hands. Should be everybody. Who'd you take it with? Professor Calvert or Gibson? Most people. Professor Gibson. Anybody take it with Professor Calvert? Okay. Any third option? So everyone pretty much took it with Professor Gibson? Yeah, in the back?
Jeffers.
Okay. Oh, yeah. I think he's actually teaching it as well. Okay. So this course is an extension of those classes. And it's tough because there's two ways we could approach this. I could walk you through and show you how to make a WordPress site and show you how to use all the tools. What's the problem with tools? They're always changing. What doesn't change? The fundamentals. The fundamentals of HTML on the web go back since the early 90s. They've added some additional stuff. They've added CSS in the meantime, but really in the last 20 years, it's been very much incremental. We've gotten some more interesting things that we'll go over, like Grid and Flexbox, but it's been relatively slow. The bulk of it and the fundamentals has been the same. We'll quickly go through this, and then I have a little speech. I always like to do the history of things because I want to kind of set the stage and set the tone for why things are and how things are. Okay, so this class is building on those other classes, and those classes, because when I teach CGS 1821 anyway, I try to teach you fundamentals. The fundamentals are very slow. It's like you build up and you do very, very seemingly basic things, and you're like, when do I actually get to making a website? And then you take your next class and you learn some more, and then now this is the final semester. This is where I consider you can actually make a modern-looking website with modern techniques. And here's the rough schedule of activities. I'd like to do a couple of weeks of review. I know it's been quite a while since any of you. How many people haven't taken a web course in at least a year? So it's been over 1 year. Is there anybody? Okay. So you'll have a couple of weeks of review. If anybody feels uncomfortable with any of this material, you're really going to have to use those couple of weeks to go through and make sure you understand everything 110%, because then we just go right into the next stuff. Okay. Really, it's maybe 3 weeks worth of stuff, because fixed width is kind of review as well. I teach it in CGS 1821. So you get a little bit of review, but then we're going to go right into the other stuff. So you really have to keep on it. One of the most common things I see with people getting lost is that because all of this material builds on each other, if there's a concept that you don't understand, then it becomes kind of tough to. So I'll give you an example. Media queries are a way to detect the size of the screen. So whether you're on a mobile device, on a tablet, or whatever. Then what we'll do with Flexbox is we'll use grids to say, or I'm sorry, with media queries, what we'll do is we'll say, okay, if this is a mobile device, I want it to be one single column. If it's a desktop computer, I want it to be 3 columns wide. Well, if you don't understand media queries, you're going to have a real difficult time with grid. And so all this stuff tends to build on each other. And same thing with Bootstrap, is that Bootstrap has its own grid system. And if you don't understand the basics and the principles of grid, you're still going to have trouble with Bootstrap. Bootstrap actually uses principles from media queries and grid. So anyway, so material builds on each other. And okay, so I want to leave that alone. Any questions about, well, let me very quickly go over the grading scale and all that. Standard grading scale. So what I usually like to do is 7 or 8 assignments. So that goes roughly an assignment every 2 weeks. Sometimes you'll have an assignment with a 1-week due date, and that's usually because some event is going on, like the midterm, or potentially it's just an easy assignment. I don't want to stretch it out. But the bulk of assignments you're going to have about 2 weeks. As far as your grades go for things like attendance and discussions and quizzes and all that stuff, your grade is based off of those assignments, and they are programming assignments. So what you'll do is you'll write code. They're more project-based. I've actually had an easier time because I'm in the computer science department. The digital media students tend to get this a little bit more because most of your work is project-based, correct? I'd imagine you don't do a whole lot of multiple choice quizzes in digital media. It's mostly projects. Okay, so that's going to be kind of in line with what you're used to. And then the midterm and final are also going to be projects. And the idea is that the midterm and final are going to be directly related to those assignments. So if anybody had me for CGS1821, I'm a little bit nicer about that. I let you take a multiple choice midterm and final. With this, it'll be project based. So quick survey, just show of hands. How many people plan to graduate this semester? Show of hands. Anybody? Maybe some people at home. Okay. So just, so maybe if anybody's watching at home, just do not fall behind. If you fall behind it in any way or start to fall behind, keep in contact with me so we can catch you up. Because I don't want a situation for anybody in here where you get to 2 weeks before graduation and then you're like, uh-oh, I'm not passing that class. Yeah, pretty straightforward. And the way I teach is the basic flow is that I give class examples, code examples. Those code examples flow directly into the assignments. And the idea is that you should be able to do the assignments based on those code examples, and the exams are based on those assignments. Okay. So there's other detail stuff. A lot of this is just school policy related things. You're adults and seniors now. You know how to read a syllabus. Any questions on anything before we get started? Yes. No books or anything related to that. Okay. You'll see, I'd stick generally to W3 schools, and you'll see various links throughout here. So like W3 schools, HTML. So we tend to stick to there, and then certain things along the way. But I try to make it self-contained. What I've noticed is that most coding books are not really like accessible to students. They're overly technical, and they're kind of hard for people to find. And I've just found that just be explaining in more plain language and terms, people tend to get it a little bit better. So, but there are extra resources here under links. If there's a topic that we're talking about and you don't quite get it, they're all here. Okay, so we're going to be, as I mentioned, writing a lot of code in this class. So just check, we're still streaming, perfect. The code editor that we're going to use, you could use any plain text editor, I don't really care. What I've noticed is that for this course, the one that most people find easiest is one called Brackets. It's actually an Adobe product. It's an open source product. They don't really advertise it that well, but it's actually pretty decent. I like it. Students have had a good experience with it. So if you go to, sorry, not tools, under links in Blackboard, you'll see a link for brackets. Don't worry about Windows. I just put this in here because some semesters I'll teach this class in one of the other classrooms, I think on like the 4th floor. So even if you have your own Windows, does anybody here have a Windows computer? Okay, even if you have a Windows computer, still click this link. Don't worry about this version. This is a specially built version that I made to get past like the security for the school, but it's very old at this point. So everybody, regardless of what computer you're using, just click this brackets link and it should take you to the brackets website. So it should be brackets.io. Again, regardless of whether you're using Mac or Windows, go to this website. Click download. Save. I'd imagine most people in here at this point know how to download and install software. On Windows, they have a little wizard where you click next, next, next a bunch of times. The school computers actually have permissions things where you can't install it, but you can still run it, if that makes sense. So it's not like you can drag it into your applications. It won't let you do that, but if you go to your downloads and double click it, it should still run. Okay, and that can take a little bit. So while you're downloading and setting that up, let me just kind of take you through a little bit of history stuff. I think that's important. Okay. So just to keep some dates in mind here, and I'll go over this very quickly. You've already heard this speech if you've taken CGS 1821 with me. So there's a guy named Tim Berners-Lee. How many people have heard that name before? Tim Berners-Lee? Anybody? Okay. And what did he do? Or what was his job, very generically? What was he, a person that worked in news? Was he a politician? Was he a scientist? Does anybody know?
Scientist?
Yeah, so he is a scientist. And I think he actually is a physicist, maybe? I don't know. But anyway, so he created a system to where, and he didn't invent a lot of these things. A lot of these things already existed, but he kind of put a lot of things together and made them easy to use. That's pretty common, by the way, in computer science. Apple and Steve Jobs didn't invent most of the things that they had, but what Steve Jobs was always good at was taking a lot of stuff that other people invented and making it easy to use. And so what Tim Berners-Lee did was he created a system where what we now call a web page, they called documents. And the reason he called documents is he was a scientist. He worked with scientific papers. And the idea was that if you had a useful piece of information, you could have something called a hyperlink. And back then, hyperlinks weren't unheard of, but they just weren't very common. If I had a research paper and it referenced another research paper, so that's very common, is like if I'm writing about a subject and somebody else did important work in that subject, I would put a reference to it. You probably had to do this in your English classes, right? How many people had to do that in your English classes where you had to do a research paper with references? Yeah, most people had to think. Now with that reference, if you wanted to look it up, what would you have to do? You'd have to go to that source and actually look it up. Kind of a time-consuming process. And with hyperlinks, it made it very simple because back then they didn't even have mice. It was, but the idea was that you could just click on the link and it would take you there instantly. Now we don't even think twice about that, but at the time that was kind of a big deal. Imagine if your research papers were like that, that any reference you gave, you could just instantly go to. So in the 80s and early 90s, they were dealing, so they were mostly on modems. And modems were extremely, extremely slow. Just for reference, the fastest dial-up modem you could get, even to this day, is, we'll round down, we'll just say very roughly, 50 kilobits per second. The first broadband was in the range of, let's say, just to use round numbers, 1 megabit per second. So that's 20 times faster, and that's the very, very earliest broadband. Today, it's not uncommon to get 100 megabits per second or even 1 gigabit per second. So you're talking jumps of 100 to potentially 1,000 times faster. Computers have also gotten much faster. Internet access is everywhere. So it used to be very much like your dial-up modem. You had to be wired somewhere and plug in. Now you can get it wirelessly. So technology has changed a bunch since then. When he first created the web, they were dealing mostly with text. Every once in a while, you'd have an image, and that image was very low quality, and video was pretty much out of the question. Well, what happened was, because of that, he was able to make a very, very simple language called HTML. And HTML worked great for what it did. But then as internet connections got faster and faster and faster, and people were more demanding, the early days of the web, it was very much, I have this piece of information I want to give you, and I will give you that information. Pretty much defines a scientist to the T. It's like they're not very concerned about how things look, interactive pages, multimedia, all that other stuff. They're just concerned with, I have a piece of information I want to give you, I'm going to give you that information, usually as text. Very quickly, businesses and corporate America and artists and all these other people saw how important the web could be and how useful the web could be. And they were trying to use this very, very basic HTML system to try to do cool, new, interesting things. One of the early, at some point I'm going to have to stop using this example, but I still think it's kind of fun. So just to give you a sense, how many people have seen the movie Space Jam? It's like a kid's movie from the 90s. It's with a bunch of basketball stars from the 90s. So this was considered cutting edge, like amazing stuff in the 90s. Like some of this layout, like this idea of being able to put things out like this. And this is very much, if you've ever seen a research paper, this is completely different. This is not just me getting the information across. This is like me doing some, at the time, interesting things with layouts. And it's kind of cool because I think this was either the first or one of the first major movies to have a website, and just for whatever reason over the years they left it available as is, and it's kind of become like a reference on the internet. But so HTML wasn't great at doing things like this. And so what they did is they came up with something called CSS, cascading style sheets. And they said HTML is really good at describing the information, but it's not really good at stylistic things and layouts and so forth. And at the time, there was also a language called JavaScript. We're not going to, so you can breathe a sigh of relief, we're not going to do any JavaScript in here. Any JavaScript that we do or any coding that we do, I'll just give you the code. You don't really have to understand it. I'll just say this is what it does, paste it in your project. And then over the years, as people got more and more sophisticated with what they wanted to do, we added things slowly over time. But really, for the most part, what we're concerned with is HTML and CSS. And since pretty much the late 90s, these haven't really changed much. HTML5 came out, which was considered a major change, and they added a lot of things. And they, but the basic idea of HTML tags and all that really hasn't changed. HTML attributes, block level tags, inline tags, all this stuff. And then same thing with CSS. So the latest is CSS3, and they added a lot of cool things with CSS3, but the basics are still there. Now there's some new interesting things that are going on with CSS, like animations and transitions and stuff like that, but the basics still work, and so you can still make a functional website. And to me, the most interesting recent things as far as layouts go are these things called Flexbox and Grid, but even those are like 7 or 8 years old now. They've been around for a while. Now, it's only been in the last few years that you've been able to, because now all browsers support them, you can reliably use them, but they've been around for a little while now. 7 or 8 years might be an exaggeration. Well, a lot of times what browsers will do is they'll put things in the browser as experimental. So as experimental, it's probably been around for 7 or 8 years, but in widespread usage, it's been maybe 4 or 5, closer to that. Okay, so anyway, so I bought myself time. Does everybody have brackets installed now? Is anybody having trouble getting it open? Okay, so enough of that. Let's go ahead and get started with some actual coding. So that sets the stage for everything, is that in CGS1821 and earlier courses, I kind of teach you the 90s version of the web. All that stuff is still, for the most part, valid. But now I'm going to teach you, now that you have the fundamentals haven't changed. I'm just going to teach you some of the more newer techniques about things like layouts and so forth. But to do that, we have to go through and make sure that everybody has those fundamentals and a good grasp of that, so I'd like to do a couple of weeks of review. So let's get right into it. So you can make this in your documents. I'm just going to make a folder on my desktop. So make a folder for the course, or if you have a flash drive, CGS4828. The other thing you can do is make a folder on your desktop, and at the end of class you can copy it to your flash drive as well. That's an option. Okay, so CGS4828, make a folder for today's date. This is just to keep your code in order. So today is 8-25-2020. Okay, so that's the starting point we're at, is that I made a folder for the class, a folder for today. Now within brackets, by the way, you can technically use brackets not doing this. It just makes it so that it keeps you from making very simple mistakes, because I see people making these mistakes all the time. Okay, so under, it probably says getting started, or maybe it points to another folder. So click that, click open folder. I'm going to try not to go too fast, but because this is blended, I only have so much time. And then I put my folder on the desktop, and then point it to today's folder. So I'll do that one more time if anybody missed that. Mine says getting started, but so there's this little button. Yours might point to another folder. Mine points to a folder that says getting started. You click that, go to open folder. Find wherever you made your CGS4828 folder, today's date, and then go ahead and select that. So the way I usually do things is I'll usually give anywhere from 3 to 5 examples, somewhere in that range. That's about usually what we can get through in one class. And then each of those I try to put in their own HTML file. So the very first file, what we'll do is we'll go to File, New. And that created a blank file. You can see here it's just called Untitled. Now from there we can start typing HTML code, but just to save a little bit of time, there's a site under links that I like to use. I should actually put that as the top link, because we'll use that all the time. It says HTML boilerplate code. So the actual site is htmlshell.com. And just to save us a little bit of typing, because a lot of people make typing mistakes, and to be perfectly honest, I don't feel like typing it myself either. Go ahead and copy and paste that in. That's going to be our starter. So for pretty much every project, the very first example or anything that we do in this course, the first thing we're going to do is head over to that HTML shell site. And then you'll notice that it doesn't really recognize that it's a web page yet. Once it recognizes that it's a web page, it'll give us something called syntax highlighting. So what do we have to do? We have to take this, paste it in, and then actually save it as an HTML file. So I'm going to go to Save. See here that it already put us in the correct folder. And that's one of the reasons that I make you go through that process, is because it's very difficult to lose stuff. And I've seen a lot of people in the past skip that step and then lose the file that they're working on, or have 3 different versions of it and they don't know which is which. So it automatically put us into the correct folder, and then we're just going to call this ex1.html. So for example 1.html. Oops. I'm going to zoom in here for you. So put us into the correct folder. And then the file name is going to be ex1.html. And click Save. And then what do you notice about the color after it recognized it as an HTML file? What happened to it? It changed, right? So this is called syntax highlighting. And it's just kind of a visual cue. It lets you know certain things are going on. So anything, and this is different between, and this is not unique to brackets, and these can change between these different editors, is that anything in blue is a tag. So notice that all this is in blue. As soon as I click it, it changes. Here, attributes are in green. Any strings in double quotes are in orange. And then anything between the tags is just, it's in black. So let's get started with a very, very basic example. So there's a bunch of tags. Let's start with the easiest, H1. And let's just put it the course number, CGS4828. And then you're going to see, so I don't go to File Save very often. What I do is I do Control S. I'm not sure what it is on Mac. I think is it Command S. But make sure you know that keyboard shortcut because you're going to be using it constantly. So just make sure that you're always saving, because what I've seen in the past is that people don't save something, and then for whatever reason they accidentally close the editor, and then they might have, or it crashes, or something happens, and then they've lost 20 minutes worth of work, and they can't really remember what they were doing in the meantime. So just get in that habit of every time you write a few lines of code, just do Control S or Command S just to save. Okay, so this is an H1 tag. This is what's known as a block level tag. We'll get into this in a minute. The way it works is that we have a tag opens and closes, and these have to occur in pairs. So it opens here, and then we have the slash thing here that closes it. Okay, so we open a tag, close the tag. And then the stuff in the middle is what the user actually sees. Now to actually view this in a browser, what we can do is there's a little button. Brackets is kind of cool because that is a built-in web server. We'll get into web servers later, but it definitely cuts down on some time on the process. So what we can do here is click this little lightning bolt, live preview, and it will open up in a browser for us. You can see our web page right here. Now the alternative is that you can actually just go on the file system and double click it. That works as well. I've noticed some people have difficulty with that, trying to find their files, and I try to be try to make this course as smooth as possible, and I've noticed that this built-in web server works pretty well. And what's nice is that you don't have to actually close it. So I still have it open. And let's say, for example, if I change it to welcome to CGS4828 and I save, I don't have to do anything. Notice I open up the browser and it automatically did everything for us. So I don't have to refresh. I don't have to do any of that. Makes the turnaround time really, really quick. So H1 stands for heading. We have H1 through 5. We'll just go through some of these tags. Another is paragraph. Do I have a link to lorem ipsum in here? If not, that's all right. So just there's a million sites that allow you to do this, but I'm just going to type in lorem ipsum. And let's just grab a paragraph of lorem ipsum text. Again, there's a million different sites that do this. You just go to Google or whatever search engine and just type lorem ipsum. And let's grab some lorem ipsum text. I'm just going to grab a little bit because my fonts are so large. And let's put that in the paragraph. Now, I think everyone in here knows what lorem ipsum is, but the 10-second version is that it's Latin text, or what they call pseudo-Latin. And because it uses the same character set as English, it looks like words we would use, but rather than having to put in dummy content or just like mashing on your keyboard, it generates these words, and again, it's very good for layouts without having to put real content in there. Because sometimes if you get into real content, people start reading the actual content and saying, oh, can you fix this or fix that? This is just for layout purposes and placeholder purposes, and then you go back and then you put the real content later. Okay. So we've got a paragraph, so we've got a heading and a paragraph. Very quickly, what website, so a lot of websites don't make a huge use of headings, but what website makes a use of headings, the H1s through H5s, pretty much on every web page. Starts with a W, very popular website. Wikipedia. And I always have to use another school, because IRC, unfortunately, we don't have too many headings on our page. Let's just say UCF. So the basic idea with a heading is that it's almost like nested. Like if you've ever worked in Microsoft Word and you have your headings, so this might be an H1, And what's cool about Wikipedia is that they take those H1s through 5s and they actually make a table of contents out of it. So let's just say, for example, we'll say this is the H1. So history might be an H1. These would be H2s. H1, H2s. Let's go down here to academics. Academics would be an H1. These are all H2s. This would be an H3. So it's just a way for organizing your content. Now, for the most part, you'll just have like a title for your page, and that'll be an H1. That's very common. So we're going to do a lot of H1s and H2s, but that's about as deep as we'll go. So we'll see history here as an H1. Then under history, we'll see the founding of the school. That's an H2. And you get the idea. I'm going through these fast because, again, this is a review. You should know most of these. If none of these are these are completely foreign to you, go to W3 Schools HTML and go through all these. They have HTML headings. What do these headings do? Okay, so W3 Schools HTML, this is going to be really good. Same thing for paragraphs and so on. Okay, so let's experiment with the article tag a little bit. Article is pretty interesting. Let's just write an article, okay? So what I'm going to do is notice that it automatically closes the tag for you. Be very careful about that, because what I want to do is I want to wrap the existing content inside of an article. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the article there. I'm going to close it over here, and then when I save it, it'll indent. So we've got this article, opens here, closes here. We've got an H1 that opens and closes here, and a paragraph that opens and closes here. Now, this is enough content that we can actually start to discuss some more interesting things about HTML. So the idea of HTML is that we want to describe what the thing is, not how it looks. So what I mean by that is an article. In any way, does article describe how it looks? No, it describes what it is or what it does. In this case, it's an article. H1, is that going to describe how it looks? No. Now, by default, some of these have styling associated with them. So by default, H1 is a little bit larger, but in itself, the H1 isn't really saying anything about how it looks, and you can always override this with CSS. Same thing with paragraph. I'm saying that this is a paragraph. I'm not saying anything about how it looks. Now, it might have some default styling, but I can always override that. I can indent it. I can, outdent. I can do whatever I want with the styling. So the goal of HTML is just purely for the structure of the page. We don't want to do anything and try to put any sort of look and feel or stylistic information. That's what CSS is for. Now, article is very interesting because anything that can fit into the concept of an article, we kind of want to use that. So it doesn't even necessarily have to be a news article, but many times it is. But it can just be some sort of discrete piece of information where we have, like, the title of an article might be the H1. We might have multiple paragraphs. An article can have a header and a footer. There's a good link I want you to read through. So if you go to article tag, you don't need to read the whole thing, but because it is kind of long, I would say just read up to right here. And let's do this example as well. Some of these get a little bit more complicated, like an article with comments, but to me this is right here, this is a good example. So what we may want to do is add a header to this article. Again, this is saying what it does. And then, to me, within the header, the title of the article, that would make sense. I don't want to move too fast. I have to move a little bit fast, because this is review. But also because we only have so much time. But everyone's able to keep up correct so far. Anybody falling behind or need a little bit of time? Everyone's good? Okay. And again, I do want you to type these all out because there's something about actually working through the material with me and just rather than just staring at it that helps. So you've got a header, title. We also might want to have some author information. I think there's actually an author tag. I don't use it very often. We'll be lazy and we'll just put it as a paragraph. And we might say that this person is the author. This would be the main content. Maybe we want to add a footer. And in the footer, we might have a way to get to comments. And now in all of these, again, I'm not saying anything about layout, style, placement, anything. All I'm saying is that this is an article. An article is a conceptual thing. I can make an article look however I want. This is a header. This is a footer. This is an H1, serving as kind of like the title of the page. These are paragraphs. Now the other thing that might not be so obvious is that I can put tags within tags. So notice here that inside of article, I have other tags. Header, and then within header I have other tags. So I can do that. Now there are rare exceptions where that doesn't work. Watch what happens, and don't type this because I'm going to change it. I can't really do this. I mean, I can, it might render, but it's not going to be, because it doesn't really make sense, does it, to have a paragraph within a paragraph? So there are certain exceptions. And notice this is actually complaining. This is one of the nice things about syntax highlighting, is because I can't put a paragraph within a paragraph, it gets confused, and then all of a sudden, if you see a lot of red syntax highlighting, it means that you made a mistake somewhere. And in this case, it's because you can't put a paragraph within a paragraph. So there are two, so any questions so far? And I think I put like because there's just so many of these tags, I can't cover them all. What I do is I included a PDF that has kind of like they call it a cheat sheet. It's kind of long for a cheat sheet, but it's pretty much a summary of very common tags. So let's go down here to, say, document structure. These are pretty good. H1 through H6s, paragraphs, and then it gives you a little example. Text-related things. We'll get into tables and lists and stuff next class, but what section are these? But you get the idea. So browse through that just to give you a sense of the tags that are out there. W3 Schools has like a full listing as well, which can be pretty useful. And by the way, there will be many times in class where I don't give you necessarily a specific homework assignment, but I'll just kind of mention that off to the side that says, hey, if any of these tags are unfamiliar, just go through the list of tags. It's kind of up to you to if you reach a point where you're like, that's not something I completely remember. It's up to you to go off to the side and do maybe a half an hour or 45 minutes of research on your own during the week and say, okay, now I have a good sense of all these different tags. Now I can move on. So all these are called block level tags. Now let's go up. Let's look at the H1 in the paragraph. So I've got my H1 that says, welcome to CGS4828. Author is Chris. Are these two on the same lines? Yes or no? Are they on the same line or separate lines? Separate. The way a block level tag works is that it takes up the entire line. So I can't really easily show this in brackets because it does some things, and you don't have to do this, but I just want to show you something. No, I don't want to use default. Okay, so most browsers have built-in developer tools. Chrome's are actually pretty decent. As much as Google annoys me, the actual developer tools in Chrome are pretty good. And then they have an element inspector here. And when you hover over it, it'll show you exactly what's happening. So even though, notice as I hover over the H1, is the blue text all the way to the end of the line? Yes or no? Or actually, the blue highlighting, I guess you'd call it. It is to the end of the line. And so that's fundamental. When I say block level tag, it takes up the entire line. Now the alternative to that are what are called inline elements. Okay, and here's a good list of all the block level elements. Most of that these you're used to. I'm trying to find one that's easy to work with. Let's say EM for emphasis. So the opposite of that is inline. And so say, for example, there's, let's do strong, because that's always very easy to see. So there's a tag named strong. I'll just write hello so we get the one word. Now strong is inline. Oops, let's go over here. Now notice that when I hover over this, is the blue highlighting to the end of the line, or is it just that one single word? It's just a single word. And so that's the difference between block and inline. Inline does not give you a new line at the end. It doesn't take up the whole line. Versus block does. So if I hover over the paragraph, you can see that the paragraph takes up the entire, even though the line has wrapped around, it takes up that whole line. Same thing with header and H1 and paragraph. They all take up the entire line. But notice here, this strong only takes up as much as it needs to. Okay, that becomes important later when we start to do some other things. But make sure you understand the difference between that, between strong and I'm sorry, block versus inline. How many people have studied block versus inline before? Show of hands. Okay. Make sure you know that becomes an important topic once we get into some layout stuff, because if you think about a layout, if I want to put content side by side, whether or not it wants to take up the entire line makes a difference, because we have to do some special things to put it side by side, you know. So that's where it's not just me making your lives difficult. There are actual uses for it in this course, and for very interesting layout things as well. So how many people have seen? So let's do this. I'm going to copy and paste this lorem ipsum. Get rid of this. Okay. So very quickly, I want to make sure everyone's on the same page. So everyone's here, right? You have your article. You have your header. You have an H1. You have a paragraph. You've got a paragraph with a strong. Copy and paste and make another lorem ipsum. Make sure you've got a footer, and within that footer, a paragraph. So we're going to be working on this second paragraph right now. So go ahead and wrap this word with EM. If it generated different text, that's fine. Just wrap one of the words. Okay, so get to this point where you have one EM and one italic. We have till 10:15, correct? Yes. Okay, just want to keep track of time. So any questions? Any questions so far? I want to make sure nobody's falling behind, because this sets the stage. This is like all these basic skills. That's why I make such a big deal about reviewing. is because once we go on to advanced things, if you don't understand this stuff, you're going to be completely lost. So I spend so much time reviewing in this class. Everyone's good so far? Any questions? Okay, and everyone's able to keep up typing and everyone can see those fonts are large enough? Everyone's good? Okay. And again, because it's so important that you don't fall behind, because if you fall behind halfway through the lecture, it's like you've wasted half of a lecture. So, because you're still going to have to go back and learn the stuff. So it's just not a good thing to fall behind. So just please raise your hand, say, I don't quite understand this. Can you explain it more? So we've got two tags. EM. So what do you think EM is, block or inline? How many people think EM is block? And again, remember the definition of block. Block takes up the whole line. How many people think it's inline? Show hands. Okay. So inline is correct. And we can see that just by viewing it. Now visually, I'll make this larger. The styling that was applied to this, remember I told you that all, or not all, but most HTML elements have some default styling applied to them. Do you see any difference between the styling between these? Yes, they're different words, but how would you describe it in just English? If you were in Microsoft Word, how would you describe these two as being what? Just italicized, correct? Italics. Now, they're different tags, which may seem kind of strange. I've got EM and I've got I for italics. But they look, I guess I can close this now. I'm done with this. They look the exact same. The reason I go through that little history lesson at the beginning of the course is because italics is not a great tag. This was actually one of the original HTML tags before CSS ever existed, back when Tim Berners-Lee was just creating scientific documents, and the idea of making your stuff highly stylistic was, hadn't even maybe occurred to him. Now, if you've ever read a research paper, people do need to italicize things, and they need to do basic things like underline and bold. They're not going to do a huge amount of formatting and stylistic things, but they will use those basic things. So he thought, hey, let me just throw in a tag called italics. Anytime you want to put something in italics, you can go ahead and do that. Now, I already mentioned that HTML, you want to say what it is or what it does, not how it looks. What do you think the problem with italics is? I've essentially said, by using this italics tag, is that I'm saying how I want it to look. I want to italicize it. And that's a problem because we can always override that with CSS. Now, EM is considered maybe the more modern version. I'm saying that's short for emphasis. I'm saying I want to put emphasis on this. Now, if you're saying I'm putting emphasis on this, does it tell you anything about how it should look? Not really, no. You're just saying I want to put emphasis on this. However, if you're saying to italicize something, you're saying exactly how it needs to look. Why is this important? So I've got my italics tag here. With CSS, I can do this is going to be an extreme example, but I can say style is equal to text, I think it's decoration. No, there's so many of these I always forget. It's, I have to look it up. By the way, you'll catch me looking these up all the time. There's so many CSS. So many CSS properties. Font style. There we go. Okay. So what I've done is I added some inline CSS. Everyone's seen inline CSS before, correct? Has anybody not seen CSS before? Everyone should have at this point. And what I've done is I'm saying that I want to put the stuff between the start and end of this tag. I want to make it so that it's not italicized and bold. Now again, this is a very extreme example, but what do you notice about that third word in there? Is it italicized, yes or no? The third word, this word right here. No. How else would you describe it? It's bolded, correct? So this italics tag here becomes almost silly because I'm saying, okay, I want the stuff here to be italics, but I'm going to italicize, but I'm going to override it and I'm going to make it so it's not italicized and it's bold. However, if I put that here, that actually makes sense because my version, my definition of how I think emphasis should be, my version of emphasis might be that I think it should be bold. That's just kind of an opinion. But we're not in disagreement that the stuff, this particular word, there's emphasis on this word. It's just we might have different ways to style what I think something should be emphasized. Does that make sense? Because this is going to come up a lot, and it's very important that you get this naming stuff. I'm going to get rid of these because it's making our code look a little bit difficult to read, but I do want you to have this, okay? And I'm going to race through one more quick example just so we get a little bit of CSS in today. And then next class we'll start right at the beginning, and we'll go through some other HTML stuff. But next class I really want to focus on CSS because that's what throws people off. Most people tend to get HTML pretty well. They might get syntax errors. By the way, some very basic things if you're catching up on typing. Don't forget, all your tags have to match correctly. This may seem obvious, but when I open a tag, I have to close the tag. If I open up a new tag in the middle of it, I have to first close this tag. So you can't do this. You can't open paragraph, open strong, close paragraph, and close strong. So I couldn't do this. So I'm going to make a mistake in the code. Don't type this. And this may seem obvious, well, A, because it's giving me syntax height, but I do see people do this. It's very important that the order which you open and close things, that's very important. So because I open paragraph and then open strong, I have to first close the last thing I opened. So because these two are kind of like the most inner things, I have to close strong and then I can close paragraph. That's another common mistake I see. Okay. Any questions before we move on? And we'll get through one more example here. And everyone's got all this code typed out. Now, one thing I will let you know, I do always post the code into Blackboard as well. But it's generally a good idea, again, that you type this out. The only time you really should use the code that I post is if you got completely lost and you're having a code mistake or something. Okay, so let's go to new. Let's go back over to HTML shell. We won't get very far with this example because we only have a few minutes, but I just want to talk about CSS. And then we're going to call this, so save it, and this is going to be ex2.html. So CSS stands for, so while you're catching up and getting all that done, so all I did was open up a new, I went to File, New, pasted in that HTML shell information, did a save. Make sure to include that .html extension. That's very important. So I did ex2.html, so it recognized it as an HTML file. Okay. So CSS stands for Cascading Style Sheets. So we're good. And again, when Tim Berners-Lee first created the web, it was mostly for scientific documents. Not a whole lot of styling going on there. Anything stylistic that he wanted in there, he just put into HTML. And it became very clear very quickly. You can see with sites like Space Jam, that's like mid-90s. The web had only been around for about 5 years. And already people were trying to do all kinds of interesting layout things, and just HTML was not equipped for that. So they came up with CSS, which stands for Cascading Style Sheets. The part that we care about that is the styling. Any look and feel, layout things, anything related visually, that's in our CSS. Anything structure, saying that this is a paragraph, this is an article, this is a header, this is a footer, anything structured, that goes into HTML. Now, there are 3 different ways to include CSS. I don't really get into external style sheets. They're not that tough, but it just makes for, it's tough to do the examples in class using external sheets, but we'll get into that. So there are 3 different ways. Now, if you go to the W3 School site under links, you don't have to do this right now. You can do this at home. I have a link to, I think W3 Schools, yeah, CSS. And they take you through all this. Okay, so the three ways to insert CSS are external, internal, and inline. We're just going to be concerned with these two right now. So let's just do a very quick. We'll do a paragraph. It works well in paragraphs. And rather than copying and pasting lorem ipsum text, we'll just say hello from CGS4828. Now the way inline works is that we do style equals, and by doing this, anything we put between the double quotes, we're saying is going to be CSS. And the way CSS works is that we have the property name and its value. So let's say, for example, I wanted to underline all of the text in this paragraph. I would do text decoration, underline. And if we view this, notice that hello from CGS4828 is underlined. Is the second paragraph underlined? Yes or no? No. So the way it works is that it only applies to the stuff from here to the end of the tag. Okay, so that's what's known as inline. And then very quickly, and this will be where I end it. Now, inside of this section called head, I can put a style tag, which means that we're going to be adding some CSS. And let's say, for example, we wanted to, so we do this, and this is what's called a selector. I know it's hard to hear. We'll try to wrap it up. This will be pretty much it. So we have the style tag. Make sure that's inside of this section called head. We have style, meaning that we're going to have CSS. This is what's called the selector. There's actually 3 types of selectors. We'll get into those later, but this is called an element selector. And the way element selectors work is that everything with this element, everything with a P, apply this. And so let's say, for example, I wanted to make everything with a paragraph red. And what you'll notice is that both paragraphs are red. And the cascading part of cascading style sheets is that there's kind of like an additive nature to it. Because notice that it didn't get rid of this. Paragraph 1 is still underlined, but because we said paragraph is red, both paragraphs are red. Now, if I added, and this will be the very last thing we do, if I added a H1 that just said, please do attendance, is that going to be red or underlined, yes or no? No, because we haven't applied any CSS to it. Okay, so that's it. And that actually reminds me. So I put it, so any questions about anything? Okay, so what I'm going to do today, I completely forgot to add it, is go on Blackboard, and I'll just put a link for attendance. You only need to do attendance the first class. And all you have to do is click submit. Okay, so just between, and I'll send out an announcement. We just ran out of time, but that's pretty much it. So, and I'll contact you if you forgot. So that's fine. I just need to do it the first week. So that's pretty much it. Any questions on anything? Yes.
So next class we meet here or we meet online?
We'll keep on meeting in class, but if you want to just watch the videos, you're welcome to do that. But only if you feel comfortable with the material. Yeah, so we will be meeting every week in the classroom, but again, according to that announcement, if you feel comfortable staying home. So we're out of time. I know some of you have other places to be, so just keep out for announcements. I will, because the class is blended, I'll be using a lot of announcements because we're kind of short on class time. So if there's no questions, be safe. Email me if anything comes up at all. Keep an eye out for the announcements, and I'll see everybody next week.
This video, when will it be available tomorrow? Or?
It's actually available right now. And then I'll rename it and put it in a playlist later. So if you check back later, you should be able to see it.